Hello and welcome to EX Law, a podcast from Customer Experience Magazine, where we unpack what it takes to build a better employee experience. I'm Becky Norman, EX editor at CXM, and in this episode, we're going to be looking at psychological safety in the workplace and how people leaders can strengthen it at important moments throughout the employee journey. To discuss this topic, I'm really delighted to have joining me Helen Sanderson, who has spent almost 3 decades working with organisations to develop human-centred, psychologically safe and person-centred ways of working. And she is now the author of a new book called Psychological Safety in Practice. Helen, hello, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you, Becky.
So in this episode, we're going to be focusing on sharing lots of practical strategies and tips for improving psychological safety at work. We're not going to be diving too much into the kind of research behind it, kind of academic leanings on it. We're going to be jumping pretty straight into that guidance part relevant for people leaders within organisations. But before we do that, let's find out a little bit more about yourself, who you are and what you do.
Well, you've just captured a bit about my history. I've worked for about 30 years as a consultant in health and care. And the book, of course, is a big feature of what I'm doing at the moment. But before the book, I set up a provider organisation called Wellbeing Teams. And we worked in health and care and were rated outstanding by CQC. And that's relevant because that's the place where we tested and developed a lot of the practical ideas that I hope to be sharing with you today.
Fantastic. So let's start with, firstly, a quick definition of psychological safety, because it feels like a term recently that's used quite a lot in the corporate space as a kind of catch-all phrase. So, and perhaps it's not as well understood as it should be. So could you tell us a little bit more about what your definition is of psychological safety?
Thank you, because everybody quite rightly uses Amy Edmondson's definition, the person who coined the term, a Harvard professor, of course. And it generally means feeling safe enough to speak up. So speak up with ideas, speak up with problems, speak up with things that need to change. So is the environment safe enough to do that? But you're absolutely right. Although it's very popular, it's also misunderstood. So a colleague recently told me that he was in a meeting with exec leaders and the person who was facilitating it said, "I now declare this meeting psychologically safe." And of course, you can't just declare psychological safety, nor can you have a psychologically safe organisation, because it's something that's created team by team.
Let's explore psychological safety first from the beginning of the employee journey. So I want to run through different moments that matter throughout the employee life cycle. So it makes sense to start at the start. So what opportunities are we missing to improve psychological safety at the hiring stage?
Well, one of the things that I've been focusing on is practically how do you do it? And I've looked at 5 different foundations of psychological safety that we can then apply, as you say, through hiring and beyond. So the first one is mattering. And that asks the question, do I matter here? Because, of course, if you don't feel like you matter, you're not going to believe that your voice would matter in the organisation. And the second one is clarity. Is it clear what's expected of me and how decisions are made? And then we go to voice. Is my voice welcome here? Can I speak up? Then connection. Do we understand what's expected of each other in the way we behave towards each other? And learning. Do we turn experiences into change? So if we start right at the beginning of employee journey, I think 2 things particularly are important here. One is clarity and the other is mattering. So traditional job descriptions are often lists of tasks and really useful for the beginning of an employee journey, but probably less useful later on. And one of the things that I've been doing is taking a job description and turning into really clear roles, 6, 7, 8 roles that says, what's the purpose of the role? What will you do to deliver the role? And what does good look like? And I think just moving from more traditional job descriptions to that kind of definition enables people to really quickly grasp A, what would I do in this role? And B, how would I judge my performance and how would other people judge it? So can we get even clearer about what the role involves is the first thing. The second thing is around mattering. So one of the approaches that we've been looking at mattering, and this work is really embedded in Zach Mercurio's work about the power of mattering. And we've been looking at something called one-page profiles that describe what's great about you, what people like and admire or appreciate about you, what matters to you as a person, and what does good support look like for you at work. So when we were recruiting for Wellbeing Teams, we would have a team of 6 or 7 of us who were on the recruitment panel, and we would send our one-page profiles to the people who were coming through the recruitment panel, coming for an interview, or in our situation, coming to a workshop. So the advantage of that is that people who are coming potentially to join the organisation immediately saw us as people who were sharing what mattered to us as individuals and what good support looks like. And then through the recruitment process, rather than just starting with sending us a CV, we invited people to develop their one-page profile and to bring it to the recruitment workshop so that we could learn about each other and what mattered to each other. And I think one of the things there is we talk about the golden rule, don't we? Treat each other as you'd want to be treated. But actually, in an organisation where we're thinking about psychological safety, we want to know what good support for each of us looks like, rather so that we can really treat and support each other as individuals, not this blanket, we just treat everybody the same way. So I think mattering, showing each other that we matter, and also clarity around roles. And in some of the really great recruitment I've seen recently, where teams have got team agreements, and these are behavioural statements about how we want to be together. For example, if we've got an issue with somebody, we talk directly to them, not about them, how we really show up and behave together. So great recruitment would send you roles. Let's be really clear about what's expected in this role. Team agreements. If you join this team, here's how we behave together, and let's share with you what matters to us as people before you join.
Yeah, I think it's so important, isn't it, to not just give people as much information as possible in terms of the work that's going to be involved, but also the people
Mhm.
that you're going to be working with. And, the fact that you're sending them those one pages just shows that you all care about each other. And if you're coming into the organization, we will care about you.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
and I'm sure that impacts the quality of the interview as well, does it? Where if you've got all this information about each other, you're coming to the interview knowing so much more and feeling so much more comfortable. Those nerves that you get within an interview probably simmer down a little bit if you've been given that.
Completely, I think so. So in Wellbeing Teams, we didn't do interviews. We did recruitment workshops where about 14 people came together and did exercises together. But the feedback they gave us at the end was, well, actually, one person said, you now know more about me than my manager does, from both the
Wow.
one-page profile and the exercises. And where this has been used, it's been used in a couple of places in the NHS and in adult social care. They're using roles and one-page profiles and team agreements. What people have done is had a question about each element of the role, and then said, out of these team agreements, which 2 do you think you'd be pretty strong at, and which 2 would you find more difficult, and tell us about that. And then asking questions about one-page profiles. So I think it's the whole element of, you're here to do a role, and obviously that information is critical, but you can only deliver your role well if you're part of a team where we're really clear about how we are with each other, and actually knowing who you are as a person really makes sense to us too. So I think those 3 things together, from a psychologically safe point of view, could really help.
So let's move on to the next moment in the employee life cycle, which is typically onboarding.
Mhm.
Job description refinement, you mentioned that earlier as part of the hiring process. What else? I mean, feel free to dive into that a little bit deeper if you'd like at this stage, but what else can organizations do that perhaps often don't at the onboarding stage to strengthen psychological safety?
I think one of the challenges in this phase is it's often where there's a handover from HR professionals to L&D. And what we also know is people join an organisation but leave their first line manager. So the role of the first line manager is really important. So one of the questions is, how can you bring in the relationship with the first line manager as early as possible? And what we also know is that the first 6 weeks, weeks are where you're particularly likely to lose people. So again, in health and social care, that's where people be going through various, police checks, etc. So we really tried to pay attention from the moment somebody had accepted the role till when we'd meet them again for the first time in induction. And we'd have various things that we tried to do, particularly around mattering. So, Becky, I know this sounds a bit weird, but we'd send people a gingerbread person in the post, and they were the most beautifully packaged gingerbread people, and they'd be dressed in different, so seasonal clothing and different things, because we wanted to do something that made us stand out. And it's really unusual, isn't it, to get great things through the post now. So it came through the post. Your family would see it as well. And we put people on a Slack channel with us as soon as they joined us, and we encourage people to post photos on the Slack channel. So one of the early things is you'd get people posting, these gingerbread people that had appeared and what their family thought about them and how they experienced that. So and I think they cost about £12. So it's not a massive investment, but it's something that makes it go, it's a wow moment. And then a couple of weeks later, you'd get a personal handwritten postcard from me or whoever the team leader was. And on one side of the postcard, it was, here's the 10 promises we make to you as a team. And on the other side, it would be a welcome note from me. And then in the Slack channel, we'd have questions that we'd post each week to start conversations. So I think one of the questions is, how can you start to develop a relationship with the person in the really early weeks before they join you for induction, and be sending messages that you're welcome here, and we can't wait to meet you, and start building relationships. So that's an early thing. And then when you meet people, so one of the things that we would do is build on people's one-page profiles. We'd do a history map and get people to share their history map with each other. Because typically in HR, your CV is held by HR and nobody sees that kind of information. But starting with a history map and we would take 10 minutes to do it. We'd then share it with each other. And it would end with what my aspirations for the future are. So sharing that kind of personal information. But going back to the job roles, so we start with job roles in recruitment. And then in induction, we'll be pausing and saying, how are you doing in learning what you need to learn to be able to deliver this role well? What else might you need to feel really confident and competent in this role? And then kind of co-design elements of induction so it really fitted with where the person with, including, what's it going to take for you to feel really confident in living the team agreements and supporting your colleagues to do that too. And wouldn't it be wonderful if you couldn't, if in order to be signed off in probation, you could demonstrate your competence in living the team agreements, competence in delivering your role, and even better, back to mattering, there was a celebration when you pass probation. So typically it just sort of disappears as a marker that this person had achieved their probation. But we would celebrate with the team, and they'd get a personal letter as well from the team leader celebrating their success in joining the team.
So some really lovely personalised moments there, from not just the start, but right up until the end of passing probation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think onboarding, there's quite a lot of focus around speed to productivity, really focusing on how can we support them to get up to being as efficient as possible, as quickly as possible. But it sounds like from what you're saying, if you're really trying to build up psychological safety from the onboarding, from the hiring process and then on to onboarding, actually you might need to slow down a little bit and take that time with those people to really get to know them.
It doesn't necessarily have to take more time. It has to be a priority. So to say that success, so if from an HR perspective, in terms of the metrics that we're looking at or the experience of the person, it's have we shown the person that we see and value them as an individual, and how have we communicated that? And have we worked with them so we're both confident that what's in the role description they now are competent to deliver? And have we asked them what's worked and not worked about their experience with the organisation so far, so that we can show that we're paying attention to their voice and listening to them? So I don't think it necessarily needs to take more time, but it's paying attention to not just are you efficiently now able to deliver your role? But do you feel part of the team? Do you feel welcomed? Do you feel noticed and known? So it's asking other questions of the processes that we're using at that stage.
Let's move on to meetings. Now, they're not necessarily unique moments that matter, like the same as onboarding or hiring, but they are a daily part of everyone's experience and work. And yet so many of them are quite unstructured. Some of them aren't necessary for the people that are in the room. People feel like they've wasted their time there. So what can meeting chairs do to make meetings better for their employees from a psychological safety standpoint?
So meetings are a microcosm of the culture of an organization. So if you've got an organization that's very hierarchical, you'll see it in the meetings. If you've got an organization where rules don't kind of matter and we do whatever we want, you'll see that in meetings. So it's a massive opportunity to introduce elements of psychological safety. So as I said before, one of the foundations of psychological safety is clarity. So having an agenda that's timed and outcome focused is a really simple thing that you could do in any meeting to change it. And it would be having what's the question that we're looking at? How much time are we allocating to it? What's the outcome? What will we see when we've finished that agenda item? And how can you come prepared? And also being clear about decision making. So is the success or is the outcome we co-create 3 ideas for how to manage expenditure over the next quarter, or we have 3 ideas about what we want to experiment next in relation to recruitment, or it's a decision, but it's a decision that has to be made by the line manager, but the purpose of the agenda item is to hear everybody's input first. So the first thing that I do is make sure you're thinking really clearly about the agendas, that they're structured in a way that people know what's expected of them in relation to preparing. And the agenda item isn't just improve communication, but says something like, we're looking at how we're using asynchronous communication and we want to develop 3 or 4 guidelines for how you'll do that well. The outcome is we have 3 or 4 guidelines that everybody's communicated. Please come prepared with your ideas about what they might look like. So just starting there is completely different. The other really simple thing you can do is introduce structured rounds. So start by saying, we want to look at how we improve asynchronous communication. We're going to go around and hear from everybody first about what we think is getting in the way of that before we then brainstorm some ideas about how to improve it. So Becky, what are your ideas? Camille, what are your ideas? So we hear from everybody in turn. And one of the things about the Voice Foundation is making sure we've got structures in place where we hear from everybody. Whereas often it's the loudest voices in the room. There are gender issues around that. And research says that if you don't speak up in the first 5 minutes of a meeting, it's much harder to do that later on. And then talking about emotions at work. So I was fortunate enough to be speaking to Colin Fisher recently, and he was saying that the biggest predictor of collective intelligence is about emotional intelligence. Are you able to read the emotions in the room, understand your own emotions, and be able to communicate that? So one of the ways that we can get better at that is starting with something called a check-in. And there are different ways of doing that. So you might do a weather check-in to say, if you're describing how you're feeling this morning in terms of the weather, what would that be? And you might say sunny or cloudy or drizzling or whatever. Or if you're describing how you're feeling right now in terms of traffic lights and red, amber and green is ready to go and red is a bit stressed and finding some things difficult, or amber is a bit of both. How would you describe yourself? So just ways that right at the beginning of the meeting, we're helping people acknowledge how they're feeling. And again, that says that you matter as a person and we don't just think everybody's showing up as a blank canvas and ready to go. So making sure you're using structured rounds, and that might include doing a check-in at the beginning, having an agenda that makes it clear to people how we're making decisions and what's expected, and what we're trying to achieve in each agenda item. And also sometimes what we try and do, or I do this a lot actually, is finishing a meeting with a round of appreciation. Because if we can get better at making appreciation part of our culture, then, that really builds towards mattering. And people often leave organizations because they don't feel like they matter. So if you ended a meeting to say, let's share one thing that's been useful or helpful about the time that we spent together today. And Becky, you might say, actually, hadn't really thinking about asynchronous communication before, but I'm now, can see how we can take that forward in a much better way. Even braver is saying, can you share an appreciation of the contribution of the person on your left? And I might say to Camille, well, when you raised that issue, I almost hadn't thought about that before. So it was really great to have you being brave enough to say that. So we can build appreciation in organizations really slowly, but meetings can also be opportunities to say good things as well as problem solve, as well as checking in. Brave, really brave, for organizations that really want to invest in psychological safety. We might use something called dissenting questions as a round. So if I'm the leader, I might say, we're making a decision about this. Let's go around and say what we might be missing in the thinking that we've already done about this. What are we missing in our discussion here? Or what are the things that I should be paying attention to that I might not be paying attention to enough? What would you suggest? So asking those kinds of questions where we're deliberately asking people to say something that might be a bit more challenging, that we might not have spotted, but that's when, we can really see psychological safety in practice, when people are able to A, ask those questions, and B, answer them.
Yeah, giving people a specific channel to say, it's okay, we actually want your criticisms.
Yes.
Because they often get ignored or people don't feel safe enough to speak up about them. But actually saying, no, this is actually what we want right now, that's going to be the fastest way to
Completely
get psychological safety.
And it's two things. It's an invitation and it's an expectation. So saying, actually, if we're doing our job well, what's not worked as well as it could have done over the last month that we could do something about? And then that takes us into the learning foundation, which is what experiment could we do over the next month to test out ideas for improving what hasn't worked as well as we might have liked over the last month.
Let's move on to moments of crisis. You mentioned those kind of check-ins that you do at meetings, so getting a sense of how people are showing up to a meeting and how they're feeling. But in terms of moments of crisis, this could be something as, tragic as a bereavement of a loved one, a mental health issue, or it could be a dispute internally with another colleague. How can managers better support a person through those times of crisis with psychological safety in mind?
I think if we start with the bereavement, something not to say is, I'm sorry for your loss, because that's what everybody says. It's the trite response, heartfelt, not undermining that it's heartfelt, but it doesn't make the person feel seen. So one of the practices that we use in psychological safety is about empathy guessing, nonviolent communication. I really strongly recommend, or compassionate communication. So if you had a bereavement, Becky, then saying something like, I don't really know what to say. It must be heartbreaking for you. I can't imagine how you're feeling about that. And then giving you sense to say, an opportunity to say, it is heartbreaking, actually. It's the most difficult thing I've ever been through. Or it's not that bad because I've been preparing for it for a while, but it still took me by surprise and is really upsetting. And I think that in our culture, we carry a belief that, we don't want to talk about it because you'll just get upset. You are upset. Giving you space to communicate that is one of the most generous things that we can do. But saying a trite, I'm sorry for your loss. And I'm not, again, not that you don't mean that, but saying how awful for you. You must be heartbroken, or how devastating, or even just really honestly, I cannot imagine how that must feel, but it must be so awful for you. So that people can actually say, yes, it is, or it's not that bad, or no, actually, it's much worse than that. Even better if you can then say, I'm really conscious about you being back at work. What can we do that will help you? For example, could it be this, this, and this? And again, what we tend to say is, please let me know if there's anything I can do to help, which is a good and important thing to say. But going further to say, I've got some ideas. What can you tell me what would work for you? And if you're not able to say at the moment, can I share some ideas and you can tell me what we could try or what wouldn't work? So at least demonstrating. But we do the best that we can. We say, I'm sorry for your loss. Please let me know if there's anything I can do to help. And usually people aren't able to respond to that. But if we can give specific suggestions, then that's often much more helpful.
It shows that you're really thinking about them as well, that you've taken the time to think about what might be helpful for them.
Yes, completely.
And what about, I mentioned, perhaps a dispute with another colleague. Where in that scenario could a manager help?
Well, the first thing that I do is see if we can prevent that kind of thing. And that's where meeting agreements are so important. And one of the ways that we establish meeting agreements or team agreements, if we start with team agreements, is we have a set of tensions. So tensions might be only some people speak all of the time. Nobody talks about stress or burnout. People interrupt each other. There's a load of gossip in our team. So you have some really generic tensions. We ask people to vote on them. So we'd end up with our top 5 tensions that are happening in the team at the moment, or that you'd be really worried about happening. So they might not be happening at the moment, but you've seen some early signs that might be a direction of travel. And then we can co-create team agreements that are about that not happening. So if it's there's lots of gossip here, a team agreement might be, if we have an issue with somebody, we talk directly to them about it within a week of something happening. So the danger is that you leave it and it builds up and builds up. So we talk about it quickly. So then what we do is 2 things really. One is we create scenarios. So if that's the team agreement, and say you're making yourself a coffee in a staff room, you can overhear 2 people talking in your team. They're clearly talking negatively in a gossipy way about another team member. What do you do? People often say things like, well, I shouldn't have been overhearing. I feel like that I'm in the wrong for doing that. Or they say, well, actually, that's the manager's problem, not mine. Or I don't want it to seem like I was eavesdropping, or I don't know what to say. But then if you have that conversation in a team meeting, say, well, so this is our team agreement, we've agreed. What would we do if that happened? And come up together with an agreement of what we say, which might be as simple as, I'm not sure that's in line with our team agreement number 4. Could you talk to the person directly about it? Now, these are hard things to do, but you're much more likely to do it if A, you've got an agreement in place. So it's not my values versus your values. So we've got agreements in place that we've all signed up to. B, we've practiced and agreed what we're going to say. So then if you do hear it, you think, okay, there's an expectation that I say something. We've practiced what it should be. I've not now got to say it, so I say it. But also, if you're the person that's more likely to be somebody who enjoys the gossip, you're more likely to think, actually, it's really clear that I shouldn't be doing this. And actually, if I'm heard doing it, I'm likely to be picked up on it. So the big thing there is it stops it being the team leader's responsibility, and we share responsibility for speaking up when something like that goes wrong. But of course, that doesn't stop us being upset with each other, etc. So if it's brought to the team leader's attention, there's one of the things that we talk about as one of the practices in connection is repair conversations, where there's a structure for it. So if it was 2 colleagues of mine and I was the team leader, I might say, I understand there's a disagreement that you've got between you. It's really important that we figure out a way of doing that. I want to invite you to join me in a half an hour repair conversation. These are the guidelines that we have with the repair conversation. And we start with, Becky, if it was you, tell me from your perspective what happened. The other person does the same. We do it in a factual way. But then it's things like, almost like, what's the story that you're telling yourself about what happened there? So going beneath that to say, well, what does this mean for your identity? Or what does this mean for how you feel about your work? But it's a set, structured process that you don't need a mediation qualification to do, that we take people through. And then at the end, it would be, what are you going to do differently as a result of this conversation? What's the other person going to do differently? When are we going to meet up together to review whether the things that we've done that you've committed to are happening? But then what might you want to add to your 1-page profile in relation to this. So it might be, please know that I'm a really sensitive person and can interpret things as a criticism, even if they're not meant that way. So that might be something that I might add to my one-page profile. The other person might say, please understand that sometimes I'm a bit blunter than I choose to be. And if I have been blunt, I'd really appreciate you saying something to me about it straight away. So adding those to one-page profile and then saying, is there a team agreement that we can agree, or a team agreement that we can build on, that makes it less likely that the conflict we've had here would happen again? So we then go back to team agreements. But typically, these courageous conversations are really scary. Team members don't have them with each other because they don't think they've got any right to, or they're too upset, etc. Team leaders often don't know how to manage it, and then they get escalated to other places in the organization, and it becomes a much bigger deal than it ever needed to be. So if we can prevent that by having a shared set of behavioral statements that we have together, and if team leaders can have a set process that they can use before anything ever gets escalated, I think that would be better for everybody.
You mentioned there as one example, an employee who's saying, I don't take criticism that well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's quite common amongst employees, and something that managers have to contend with when they're giving constructive feedback, but sometimes it can be quite difficult feedback to share. I'm sure some of the things that you mentioned there can carry over to this scenario as well. But how else can managers provide feedback in a way that doesn't damage the relationship with their direct report, and with psychological safety in mind?
A really great point. And I think the first thing is going back to one-page profiles, and if anything is mentioned about that. So if you know that I'm very sensitive and I'm likely to perceive things as a personal attack, saying at the beginning. So if it's you and I, Becky, I'm saying, I want to share some information with you about the recording that's happened over the last month in the team. I know that you often take these things sensitively, Becky. I'm aware of that. So I want to be really clear that this is about our recording in relation to our standards, not about you as a person and how you behave in the team. And we've got a set of standards about recording. I've noticed in the last month that 4 of your entries don't give the amount of detail that's required. I'd love to hear from you about whether there's anything going on that stopped that happening for you. And then perhaps we can agree how we take that forward, how we can both feel confident that recording will get even better, and whether you need any support from me to do that. So let's start by hearing from you. So it is, it's not giving a verdict. Becky, you're rubbish at doing, you've got really sloppy with your recording. But it's also saying, I know that this is a sensitive issue for you, and I'm behaving in this kind of way to acknowledge that. But that doesn't mean that I don't give you feedback that's difficult, but it also means that I want to hear your version of it. So here are the facts. Let's hear from you about what got in the way, but let's be really clear that we've got standards here that we're committed to working within. What can you commit to, and do you need any support from me? And then when should we review it?
Those are all the moments. I'm sure there's many others that we could go into, but we are short on time. So perhaps we could have you back to dive into this even more, because I'm sure it's been really helpful for those listening. I'm asking every guest this, and perhaps you can answer it from a psychological safety perspective. We're living through so much turmoil, change, and unknowns, and most organisations are struggling to support their people through it. What's the one thing leaders consistently get wrong about supporting employees through major change?
One of the foundations is around voice, and the thing that can go wrong there is around closing the loop and being clear. So back to Clarity Foundation, what has already been decided that can't be changed? What decisions are in the mix now for people to contribute to? What is the contribution that they can make, and are they doing that as making suggestions? Is it a consultation? And then when does that close, and when will we let people know the outcomes of that? So when people know that decisions are being made about layoffs, about restructures, etc., but they don't know how it's going to impact them, they don't know whether they've got any contribution to make in that, and they don't know whether they're going to get information, that just makes it even harder for people to manage. And I know everybody says be clear about communication, but it is closing the loop in relation to clarity. It's these decisions that are going to be made by these people here. Here's how you can contribute, and here's how we'll tell you what happens next.
Thank you so much, Helen. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on EX Law. You've got a new book, Psychological Safety in Practice. Is that out now or is it coming soon?
October, but you can pre-order it now, but it's out in October. Thank you for asking about that.
Brilliant. Well, do check that out. Thank you so much, Helen. I hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you. It's been amazing to have this conversation with you. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you, Becky.